What you're about to experience is one man's quest to see beyond the tumultuous period we're in and to envision what lies just beyond our grasp, yet well within our reach. Welcome to Larry Rifkin's America Trends, where the future has arrived, and it's just in time.
Welcome back to America Trends. John Krofsik with me. I'm Larry Rifkin. And John, have you mulled over the situation in Iran?
Not lately. You haven't heard much coming out of the Middle East over
You haven't
there.
mulled over the whole situation. Well, no, you've heard a little bit about what's going on in the Middle East.
Oh, no, I know. But lately it's been kind of quiet on
Yeah, a
the
little
news.
quiet. Well, actually, there's been some flare-ups in Gaza with Israel. And then, of course, there's been this whole issue of, the issue of the Saudis and the royal crown prince and his fingerprints on the dismemberment of the journalist. I mean, just a horrible situation.
Well, the Saudis, they're like a frenemy. I think
that's a good way to put it.
Tread lightly with them, because at one point they're our friend, but then they're supplying other people that, we got to be very careful with them. I mean, look what they did to this poor guy.
Oh, it's awful. But then again, this administration has listed totally in the direction of the Saudis and away from Iran. I mean, we got out of the nuclear deal,
right?
The sanctions and secondary sanctions on those that still do business with them. So we clearly have said, well, whatever rapprochement Barack Obama was attempting, forget about it. We're definitely in the camp of the Saudis, and we're party to some pretty terrible things going on in Yemen. But that doesn't mean, just because the Saudis are kind of bad actors, that doesn't mean that the Iranians aren't bad actors too.
Oh no, they got their problems. I mean, you sort of wonder. Here they had the Shah we had, and we didn't make any friends over there with the Shah, because then they brought in the Ayatollah, and I mean that what a mess that whole.
Yeah, we've had a very difficult situation ever since we overthrew their democratically elected leader and established the Shah. So we have not had a great relationship with the Iranians. But nonetheless, I thought we could have done more back. I think it was during President Obama's first term, when in fact young people took to the streets of Iran. And I think they called it the Green Revolution. And we're always told that the Iranians are young, their demographics are moving toward the West, and there's got to be a way to dislodge this particular group of leaders in Iran. And hopefully that will happen over time, because they are a really talented, wonderful civilization. They're one of the oldest civilizations in the world intact.
Well, let me tell you this. Here's my prediction. I think the women of the Middle East are the ones that are going to stand up and change, because they're tired of being dirt, being second-class citizens, and you see it already in Saudi Arabia. They're starting to win driving and stuff. So I really think the women may save us in the Middle East, truthfully.
Well, I'm really wondering, because, the sanctions that we put on them are pretty tough. And we read about, and I see lines in Tehran where people are going for basic goods and they're not available, that they're really having a difficult time over there. You wonder when the breaking point is going to occur, and whether America's in any position to play a meaningful role. And would we even want to establish a good democratic regime in Iran? I don't even know what our commitment to human rights and democracy is at this moment in time.
Yeah, anymore. I don't know either. I mean, we haven't done well in Afghanistan or Iraq, and we have a very poor record of really making friends with people, making things better for people.
And I guess one of the questions is, how important is it for America to take a very strong stand as it relates to Iran in order to encourage whatever's happening there on the ground, and knowing that they have a partner ultimately in the United States. Well, we are laying some pretty heavy wood on the mullahs, and it's a very interesting topic that we can address today with Raheel Raza. And she is a very interesting woman, a founding member of the Muslim Reformer Movement and an international human rights activist. And she's joining us. Joining us on the Lanka Trends is Raheel Raza from the Clarion Project Advisory Board. She's also a founding member of the Muslim Reformer Movement and international human rights activist. And Raheel, I don't know that most of us understand really the true dynamic within Iran. We have our own perception of Iran and the mullahs and the way the society works. But do we have many misconceptions in the United States?
To some extent, because, the Iranian regime, the Ayatollahs, has kept it as a very closed society. And so they don't really want too much of the word getting out. Now, the reason I know this and many people is because we work with the dissidents who are trying to bring democracy into Iran. Very quickly, after Khomeini's revolution, they have, the Ayatollahs have established this very, very corrupt regime. And they say that they are God's divinely appointed vicegerents on the ground. So, in other words, they're telling the people of Iran, sometimes very poor, illiterate people, who look up to religious clergy, they're telling them that we have been divinely appointed by God, and so whatever we do is right, but what they're doing is not right. And this is not new. The news about human rights violations in Iran has been public for a very long time. I learned about it first about 5 years ago when I first started going to the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, where I'm accredited and I go 3 times a year. And I started meeting the dissidents and some of the victims, and I started reading the reports, and it was absolutely appalling. So this is essentially a regime that oppresses its own people, that oppresses minority groups like the Baha'i. And when I say oppress, I mean they kill them. They torture them and kill them. We're not talking small-time oppression.
Well, George W. Bush made this country, along with North Korea, and I think at the time Iraq, part of the axis of evil. And, of course, we have all been told of the repression within North Korea. What is the repression like in Iran? What is daily life like in Iran?
Well, the people tell us that, first of all, there's huge economic instability because, thanks to your previous President Obama, who lifted the embargo on the money and sent billions of dollars back into Iran, none of it floated down to the people. So what daily life is like, that you either follow what the regime is forcing down your throat, which is both religious and political, or you are jailed and tortured. I mean, this is 2018. Iranian women have been jailed and abused and tortured for uncovering their hair. Why does that make me stand as a human rights activist, as a women's rights activist? They oppress the LGBTQ community and say that they should be killed. They should be taken to the top of a high building or the highest mountain and be thrown off. They have no qualm with that. They hang people. We have had Canadian citizens of Iranian heritage who went for a visit, who were jailed, tortured, and some of them killed. So this is what daily life is like.
Well, do you believe, I was reading a piece in the Wall Street Journal from Reza Pahlavi. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, but he is
yes.
Yeah, he is the Shah's son.
Yes.
And
yes.
He's saying that the Iranian people have a message. They want their country back. What signs do we see? Because he's talking about a national protest movement that seems to be building in Iran, decrying this social, political, and economic injustice with life under the Ayatollah.
Well, he's absolutely right. According to what we have been told by the dissidents, and whatever little news gets out on social media, there are demonstrations all across Iran, from the smallest village to the largest town. And these are demonstrations by young people. We've also been told that a large majority of the population that has left behind in Iran is under 35. And they want freedom. They want democracy. I mean, they want something very simple. They want individual rights. They want to decide how to practice the faith, where to practice it, and not to be forced into anything. So, yes, you are right, and Raza is right. There are demonstrations across, and all we can do, sitting in the comfort of our homes in the West, is support them.
When you look at the Iranian-U.S. relationship, I know it's changing under Donald Trump, perhaps, because he has now gotten out of the nuclear deal. But if we go way back to the 1950s and a democratically elected leader who we overthrew and put in the Shah, what are the lingering effects of that?
Well, the lingering effects, of course, are there. There has been manipulation, but even under the Shah, there was a lot of freedom. I mean, the issue with Iran is that what the people are asking for is nothing new. They have lived through that. There is a generation that knows how modern Iran was, how progressive, where women were in every walk of life. And, the manipulations of leadership that go on because of the oil is something entirely different. But essentially, the human rights violations by the current regime, by the Ayatollahs, is something that has to be stopped. And this is what the people want. This is what the people are going to do.
If I recall, back in 2009, so many Iranians took the street, and they were looking for American support at that time. And perhaps that was a fulcrum. There could have been a moment when a real revolution could have taken place. What happened, and why do you think America did not intercede at that moment?
Well, there are many political wranglings that go on, at a stage where we, the ordinary people, are not aware of it. But definitely under the Obama administration, he had a policy of trying to appease countries and people, and this is where he miserably failed in terms of bringing democracy and full rights to some of these countries. So we have a situation where Iran had all these years of flexing their muscle, the regime, and of course I differentiate very clearly between the regime and the people. It's the people who are suffering and who want the change. And they've been clamoring for this change for a very long time. The United Nations Human Rights Council had an amnesty report when I was there, and the Iranian ambassador actually stood up and said, we have no human rights abuse in Iran. We have no human rights violations. It's all USA and Israel. And, there was like dead silence. And I held up the report and said, but you must be mistaken, because the names, the dates, the times, the locations, and everything is in this report. But the Western world and Western leaders, even today, would rather do business because of oil than stand back and say that we will not do business as usual with a country that has such an abysmal human rights record.
But the United States doesn't really need Iranian oil. Is it our European allies who do? Because now we are exporting a lot of energy. What is it that the United States really wants or needs from Iran? Many would think to stop some of the revolutionary fervor that is let out of the borders of Iran and becomes dissettling or unsettling to the people in the Middle East.
Oh, yeah, you're being very polite about it. Make no mistake, the regime funds terrorism full time. They fund Hezbollah and Hamas, and so and they fund the militias abroad. So yes, there is a very, very strong need to put in the sanctions and to somehow curb this export of terrorism that is happening through this regime.
But the reimposition of sanctions as part of our pulling out of the nuclear deal is absent the support of our European allies, so we're out there on our own. Is it having...
I understand that. I understand that. But this is where the European allies need to pull up their socks and, as I said, understand that they should stop doing business with countries that have abysmal human rights records, because that is the only thing that gives them any kind of an alert. That is the only barrier to what they are trying to do. Now, the sanctions have had an effect because, as I told you, there are demonstrations all over Iran. Mm-hmm. And the real change comes when a people decide that they want change. When people rise up and say that we want change and we're going to make sure that we get rid of this very, very corrupt regime, that is when change comes, and this is where we have to support them. And it is happening. And I am quite optimistic that this regime will go. It has to go.
Well, with all the young people that they have, and we know the Persian Empire, very intelligent people in Iran, and we've seen these years of international sanctions that seemingly have taken a toll on Iran. I was reading where about 1/3 of the Iranian young people aged 15 to 29 are unemployed. So what impact is that having if, in fact, you have this bubble of young people going through who are dissatisfied and unemployed?
Well, that is where they want the change. I mean, this is the situation that would have gotten worse under the regime because they're not helping by in any way financially, stabilizing the young people. There's nothing that these young people would like more than either to be able to get out of the country, which they can't, or have some foreign intervention there, which would give them, a quick answer to their problems. But the change has to come from within, and it always takes time. And this is where we on the outside have to show them our support. And there are many thousands of Iranian dissidents and expatriates who are living in North America under freedoms. And the one beautiful thing that I have found in the Iranian people is that no matter how long they've been out of the country, no matter how cruelly they were kicked out, they have a very strong sense of their Persian heritage. They're very proud Persians. And they want to be associated. So I met people who said, 5 years ago that they would never step foot in Iran, but now they're saying if change comes, we will go back, we'll set up businesses. We want our children to grow up with their heritage, the rich Persian heritage that exists in that country. Now, these ayatollahs, of course, choke art, culture, music, anything to do with beauty.
Well, let's talk about the imposition of the religious dominance of the country. That is not, in your way of thinking, what the Iranian people really want. So tell us historically, out of what particular sect or what particular framework does this Ayatollah-driven religious fervor come from? And is this looked upon as an imposition from the top, or what is this leadership considered to be in the historical sweep of Iranian history?
Well, Iranians are primarily Shias, which means that they follow in the footsteps of the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, known as Ali. Mm-hmm. In fact, many of them believe that Ali should have been the rightful heir to the Prophet Muhammad. Right now, as we speak today, we are at the beginning of the Islamic New Year, the lunar calendar, which started 10 days ago. And Shias across the world are commemorating the massacre of the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is that the Ayatollahs should have spiritually been following the message of the Prophet and of Ali and of the Quran, if they call themselves true Muslims, as they do. But they're not. They're not practicing anything that was in the Quran or was divinely given to Muhammad through God, or even the people they are supposedly following, which is Ali. What they are doing is power, misogyny, control, political maneuverings. So the people are fed up with this. I mean, they want to be able to follow the religion of Islam, whether they are Shia or Sunni. And having said this, I should mention that there are many more sects within Islam. Mm-hmm. They want the freedom to practice it the way they want. They don't want it forced down their throat, especially a mutated version, which the Ayatollahs are practicing and saying that, they are divinely appointed by God, so they can do whatever they want. So they justify many of their atrocities in the name of religion. And this gives, it sticks in the throat of many of these young people who have said that they're either secular or they want freedom to practice the faith as they want.
I understand the yoke that you're talking about, but what will it be? What really is the turning point? Is it going to be these economic sanctions if we cut off their ability to export their oil through the Straits of Hormuz? What might prompt these young people to be able to really shake off the effects of this regime?
Well, in speaking to a religious scholar from Iran, a young man who grew up there, he says there's nothing that would help them more than if they had the freedom to travel outside the country, or, for the Iranian dissidents to be able to come back into the country without fear of being killed, because through that interaction and the support, the change may come. But the chain of events has already started, and I don't think that the genie can be put back in the box. The demonstrations, the lobbying by people will bring about the desired results. But of course, there is so much that they have to pay for, because the mullahs, they have militia at the beck and call who are paid, and they're harsh and cruel and, will torture and kill anyone who is considered to be a dissident. So these young Iranian people, the people living there, are putting their necks on the line to bring about this desired change. And every day there is a new story of someone who has taken a stand, even a simple thing like a woman standing on top of a brick wall and taking off her head covering and showing defiance and saying, we will not be ruled by the Ayatollahs anymore. We will not be ruled by force.
But having said that, how does America avoid having people turn their anger and their weariness at what's going on against us, given various sanctions in terms of the use of the global financial system that is leading to a lot of severe shortages of cancer drugs and certain food supplies? So they rally around the flag, if you will, even if that flag is atop the Ayatollah's mansion. What helps us to avoid them turning against us and recoiling and supporting the regime in a time of stress?
Well, that, of course, is possible because, people have knee-jerk reactions and they need to blame someone. But from what we see and hear around us, it is not the case, because the young Iranians understand that America is supporting them. They understand that there are people like us in the West who are supporting them, who are rooting for them, and who would do anything to be able to physically help them, but we are unable to do that. There are, ways in which unobtrusively funding is sent to these people to support them. So, they do understand that, those who are reasonable and logical, although, having said this, there's nothing more that the Ayatollahs would love than for the Iranians to hate America. And they fire the flames of this hatred. This is the great Satan for them. It has been since the time of Khomeini. America has been called the great Satan. And so that hatred is constantly being fueled. But the average educated Iranian, and there are many, many educated people there, understand that there is a difference between what the Ayatollahs are telling them and what the reality is. They see the rest of the world. They see young people like themselves who have freedom to follow their own path.
And how do they see this? In other words, how westernized or how much is information in this age of the internet seeping into the consciousness of these young people in Iran?
Well, they are very westernized. They have always been very westernized because that was their history. It was just that they were forced into darkness because of this period of the Ayatollahs. But, as you say, it's an age of technology, and these are very, very bright people. They have ways in which they can break through those walls and those barriers and actually get the news that they want to, through people who are living outside, through family members, through relatives, through friends, who are constantly encouraging them and telling them that, your freedom is the most important thing at stake here.
But their ability to travel is quite limited, you say.
I'm sorry?
Their ability to travel outside of Iran is extremely limited.
Oh, it's limited, yes. So I told you, I gave you the example of, those expatriates of Irani heritage. Most of them have families back there, so they're afraid sometimes to speak out, but some of them who have traveled back have they've been arrested, and in the case of two Canadians, they were jailed and then they died in jail. So, this regime and their bloodhounds who are tracking people down have no qualms about human life, about torture. They have everything at their means to stop people from bad-mouthing what they're doing. And what they're doing is extremely evil. It's known. They say that anyone who is gay, the LGBT community, should be taken, as I said, to the top of a mountain and pushed down and killed.
What about their civilian leadership, which is elected? And we hear from time to time that they've gone from more radical leadership, civilian leadership, to more moderate under, say, Mr. Rouhani. What should we believe about the ability of the civilian leadership to affect the thinking of the Ayatollahs?
Well, everything filters down from the top. They have no misunderstanding about the fact that the Ayatollahs are in charge of everything. They are the ones who run the institutions. So they are the state and the religious leadership all folded in one. Can you imagine what a horrific picture this paints? They are politics and religion all together. So they run everything. Nothing moves without their sanction or without their input, whether it's schools, hospitals, institutions. Everything is controlled by them. And this is what I mean about people wanting freedom from this kind of control. So they know what's happening on the ground, and as soon as they hear voices or see dissidents, they track them and they put them down.
You have an international feel for what is going on in relation to Iran. So help me understand, when Donald Trump dropped out of the accord over the objections of other signatories, and we're talking about France, Germany, Russia, the UK, the European Union, and China, they've all publicly expressed their upset, and they pledged to work with Iran, but they have failed to come up with ways to really circumvent some of these secondary sanctions. So are we at all aligned with some of our allies on that deal? We broke away, but is there any working together that is going to be required in order to move this regime out of place?
Possibly, but the working together has to come from the other side. President Trump has taken a very strong stand, and he's taken a good stand. The European Union and the rest of them have to understand why this is happening and look at the long-term vision. Now, they have their own vested interest in keeping the relationship and the accord open, because it's all about money and the oil and trade. But once they understand that, there should be no trade with a country that has such a abysmal human rights record, then they have to come around to this way of thinking. I don't think, or I personally don't believe, that President Trump should cave in and give in to their demands. He should stand firm on his ground, because change is coming, and let the others follow his way of thinking.
Let me ask you about the existential threats to the regime. First, you've got an economy that seems to be in disarray. You've got environmental devastation. Evidently, Tehran is a mess, and the smog over it is really just choking people off. You've got these unprecedented nationwide protests and labor strikes, and you've got a fearless population engaging in this daily act of resistance. What proves to be the most threatening to the regime as you look at it?
The biggest threat to the essentialist threats are there. But let me also remind you at the same time that the financial threat is not a real threat. The Ayatollahs have more money in their coffers than you and I can even dream of. They have billions of dollars. And this is because every Shia on the face of this earth sends 10% of their savings back. It's known as a tax called khums, and they send it back to Iran, which the Ayatollahs then take. And if you just do the math and look at the numbers, and they've been doing this for thousands of years. So it's not just something that is happening now. So the financial restraints are only on the people on the street. The Ayatollahs are very wealthy. So if they would only use some of their wealth to bring about the correct kind of changes in terms of the environment and the infrastructure and education and institutions, of course, this angst would not be there. But we have to wait and see. It's one day at a time, and we have to wait and see what is going to happen. But I'm hopeful that the people of Iran have spoken out, and they have decided the regime has to go, and hopefully the regime will go.
Recently, there was a piece in USA Today about the current status inside Iran, and they quoted Mohammed, a merchant at Tehran's Grand Bazaar, and he said, just look at our neighbors, Iraq and Afghanistan. After 6 p.m., you can't go out. It's too dangerous. This is what happens when Americans intervene in other countries. So is there a certain feeling on the streets that we need to do this ourselves in our own way, and we really don't want the West involved?
I believe that yes, it is best done when it's done by the people themselves. Not having boots on the ground is something different. But giving the kind of support that we need to, which is emotional support and social media support, is extremely important as well. But yes, the change has to come from within, and it is the people who have to bring about the change, because it is in their own geographical area, it is in their own cultural context, and in their own heritage context. So the best change is the one that the Iranian people will bring themselves.
Now, USA Today, they said, many Iranians who expressed disapproval of what they viewed as Donald Trump's brash leadership style and aggressive policies toward Iran, but admired what they said the president was achieving for his own country. What do you sense that the Iranian people feel about the current leadership in the U.S.?
Well, they'd like to see some of those freedoms for themselves as well. As far as President Trump is concerned, it doesn't matter whether he sneezes or coughs, it's always a Russian collusion. So, and he's in a lose-lose situation as far as popularity goes. But definitely this is a move that he has taken in favor of the Iranian people themselves, and have said very openly that he supports the change that the Iranian people will bring. So there will always be those who are not happy about it, but largely I understand from the people I speak to that they support this, and there's nothing that they would like better than having a free and democratic country like the United States.
In closing, there was a statement made that I read today from an investment guru, Nouriel Roubini, and he's warning about voodoo. Okay, let me do this again. I just read today where investment guru Nouriel Roubini warns about America and voodoo economics. He calls it a perfect storm brewing to plunge the U.S. into recession in 2020. I say all of this because he's suggesting, and this was a guy who did see the 2008 calamity in our fiscal and financial markets coming about, and was one of the first to warn us. He said, as a result of this voodoo economics that he sees, he fears that the president will launch a war to distract the public from the financial chaos. And let me read his quote. Since Trump has already started a trade war with China and wouldn't dare attack nuclear-armed North Korea, his last best target would be Iran. How do you react to that?
Well, I would like to say that I'm an eternal optimist, and I don't believe this to be accurate. But of course, this is the best part of living in a democracy, is that everybody is allowed to have an opinion. And as I said, all we can do is wait and watch. Time will tell us who made the right decision.
Raheel Raza, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. All of your work for the Clarion Project and a founding member of the Muslim Reformer Movement and an international human rights activist from Canada. Could you give us any of the websites or any of the organizations you're affiliated with that you would like people to learn more about?
Yes, of course. The best one to be part of is www.clarionproject.org. They have a daily newsletter which gives news about what is happening in the world of radicalization and also gives voice to progressive liberal Muslims like me. And it would be great to sign up for the newsletter, which is clarionproject.org. And people can also get information from the Muslim Reform Movement, which is www.muslimreformmovement.org.
Raheel, thank you so much for being with us today on America Trends.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.